If it's possible, I think it might be. We're a nonprofit formed about 5 years ago to help support, mentor, and inspire LGBT entrepreneurs. We've grown to a network of about 12,000 in 7 cities, and soon we'll be moving online so that you can start out wherever you go, if that's important to you. We'll be launching in about a month an Access to Capital program. So on our website, which looks like it came from 1999, we know that. It's just not the most important thing right now for a small startup who is a nonprofit. You'll be able to come to the website, and for a small fee to encourage quality, submit your business plans to LGBT-focused funders. We're beginning to see a number of funders interested in funding LGBT-founded startups. There's an angel group on the East Coast, and there's a Venture Out Fund that's being formed, and a syndicate that 500 just announced as well. So check back, and we're glad to see you here tonight, and we're glad to partner with Galvanize and 500 and Lesbians Who Tech, and the COO of Lesbians Who Tech is here. It's Leah Niederthal. Come on, Leah. I had it.
You were so close. So close. Thanks, Krys. Yes, I'm the COO of Lesbians Who Tech, which is the community. That guy's wearing an amazing I Heart Lesbians Who Tech shirt. Love it. Lesbians Who Tech is the community of queer women in and around technology. We've been around for just under 2 years, and in that time have grown from little bitty happy hours with 75 people to a community of 14 chapters with 4,500 women, lesbians in and around the tech space. So we love Rainbow Round and we love 500 Startups because one of the goals of Lesbians Who Tech is to elevate the stories of queer founders, queer women in technology. And so we're really excited to have just an amazing panel of speakers. And the one thing that I want you to sort of think about is so last year in February, we put on the Lesbians Who Tech Summit, which brought over 800 women to the Castro Theater. We're going to be doing that again, and tickets are actually, the earliest bird tickets are on sale now. So if you go to lesbianswhotech.org, you can get the early bird tickets, and we hope to see you there at the Lesbians Who Tech Summit the end of February next year. So thanks so much, and I'll hand it over to Mark from 500 Startups.
I promise I'm the last person between us and actually like hearing some really interesting talks from people. So I'm at 500 Startups. I do marketing, PR. I just want to first really thank Bruna from Galvanize for letting us host Rainbow Round in this awesome space. Like Galvanize has been super, super helpful and supportive of everything 500 Start Out and also Lesbians Who Tech, all the stuff we've wanted to do to bring people together. So just give a round of applause to Bruna and Galvanize for being really gracious. Thank you, Bruna. If you guys want to learn more about 500 Startups, just go to 500.co. We are an accelerator program and seed fund. We have an office just down the street. We just closed applications for our last accelerator batch, but we're opening them up, I think, probably in another month and a half. It's kind of like all the time now because we're running a ton of accelerator batches all the time. So please check that out if you are a founder with a company and want to be part of our program. So tonight should be fun. We're doing some lightning round talks. So everybody's going to have like a really quick talk on the topic of sort of their biggest mistake as an entrepreneur and what they learned from it. And then after that, we'll have some time for Q&A with each individual speaker. So the first speaker up today is Teresa Tuan, who is a physician, award-winning filmmaker, musician, and digital health entrepreneur in the San Francisco Bay Area. She started college at 12, whoa, went to medical school at 16, whoa, and became a board-certified practicing pediatrician at 23, holy shit. Her passion for innovating a better healthcare system inspired her to launch Docto Rec. So thank you so much for being here, Teresa. She's up first.
Okay, if I stand, I'm hoping you guys don't mind if I sit, since if I stand, I'm just going to pace, and you're going to wonder why I'm making circles. So I'm Teresa Tuan. I tell myself I'm a pediatrician by training, but an entrepreneur by choice. And the reason I say that second part is I think it helps put in perspective for me the fact that being an entrepreneur really means continuing to decide to take those risks because there are so many other careers people can pursue, and medicine being the other very obvious one that I also pursue. I decided to become an entrepreneur because I think, like many people, I saw a problem and I thought I had the best way to fix it, or that I could uniquely come up with a way to fix it. And the problem I saw is I work in pediatric urgent care. This means 12-hour shifts of seeing a patient every 15 minutes, anywhere from ages like 2 days old to 18-year-olds coming in for all sorts of problems. And what I would see time and time again were very anxious parents bringing their kids in for reasons that they didn't really necessarily need to come into the hospital for, right? But they were worried, so they decided, I'm gonna pack up every child in the car and I'm gonna drive down to urgent care. And then the flip side, parents who kept waiting at home and brought their kid in when really, for the safety of the child, they probably could have brought their child in sooner. So it's a really hard problem, right? This is not because they're bad parents, it's not because they're trying to be neglectful, it's because they didn't know. And really, when in your life have you been taught how to manage your health? Like, we teach you how to drive, we teach you basic finance, kind of, right? We teach you how to read, but we don't really have a great system of teaching, whether it's parents, whether it's patients, when to worry. So this was the problem I saw, is because I was seeing a lot of people who didn't need to be there, arguably, and then I'd see 1 or 2 people who needed to be here sooner, and how can we teach people when to access the healthcare system when they need to? Because that's the goal. So for me, it really is a problem of education, right? And our current US healthcare system isn't built to teach people how to be healthy. We're maintenance and repair. Like, we're basically Midas, and we replace mufflers. But what really happened that kind of started the idea for my business is, it was another busy day in urgent care. I was running behind as always, and I opened up the door and I saw this adorable 3-year-old child and her mother watching Elmo videos. And they'd been watching Elmo videos for the past hour because I had been running behind. And I thought to myself, just because I'm running behind and I don't have time with my patients doesn't mean my patients aren't in the hospital waiting, right? Why not use this time to actually teach them a little bit about what brings them in today, right? To do a little bit less work for me in teaching people about the basics of a fever. And ideally, because they're a captive audience, teach them, when do you really need to come into the hospital? Could you have waited at home with this instead? So that was the initial idea behind my company, Dr. Twan's Health Academy, was that we make animated parent education videos that can be shown during unutilized times in the hospitals and clinics. I did one very brief survey of a typical week where we saw about 65 patients a day, and if you factored in 15 minutes of wait time for each visit, people waited over 16 hours to see a doctor. We are only open for 14 hours. And so that was the initial thought, is it would be B2B. We'd go to hospitals and clinics and provide this as a solution to also help them meet the new problem they're facing with the Affordable Care Act, which is that instead of being fee-for-service, which is the way that we are now, right? I make more as a hospital for charging more. We're switching to something called prospective payment. And what prospective payment is imagine if you had a hospital, the government's going to say, I'm going to pay you X amount, let's just pick easy numbers, $5,000 to take care of this population of patients. If you spend $5,001, you lost $1. If you spend $2,000, you just made $3,000. And that's the name of the game that we're switching to in the healthcare system, is it's no longer going to be about billing and about revenue generating units. It's going to be about lean, efficiency, and figuring out ways to keep people out of the hospital. Right? So I thought, okay, we have a market opportunity. I know how to do this. I've done filmmaking before. I can do a lot of this myself. I have a high enough risk tolerance right now. And so I set out. And we started out making a couple prototype videos. We had a proof of concept. I approached some local Bay Area healthcare organizations, and initially it was really promising. And then I realized that dealing with hospitals, in particular legal teams of hospitals, was gonna take me a lot of time. And I slowly saw the amount of my checking account go down as like my legal invoices went up. And it was this lead time that just kept expanding and expanding. And it became a fundamental problem of math, right? Right now, there's no impetus for hospitals to move quicker. They see that the market's going to change. They know the market's going to change. They believe that this is a great product to help them adapt to this. But no one's actually holding pressure on them now. And if I was going to survive, I had to figure out some near play goals. So that was the mistake that I made, is I got so caught up in trying to anticipate a moving market, because it's exciting, right? Like, everyone wants to talk about disruption. No one wants to talk about helping things maintain the status quo, right? And it's, I think, especially for new entrepreneurs, even more exciting to think that you can become part of the front of a movement. But I failed to recognize the reality of that. You need to be able to make those near play goals because they're what keep you afloat in the meantime. Because especially in a market like healthcare, where there's so much regulation, where people are still trying to sue the Affordable Care Act into oblivion, I don't know when that change is going to come. I still believe that that change is going to come. I believe that it's the best thing for our society. But if I'm going to keep a business running, I have to figure out how can I make my product a solution that works for the way things are now while still maintaining a position to adapt with the market as it changes. So that's my lesson.
All right, so let's do a couple questions. Anybody want to go first? Anybody have any questions? No? No questions. Normally people are going crazy. All right.
So did you use any talent to create the content, or was it all yourself, or how did you get that team together to start putting out the actual videos?
So it was primarily, the videos were all written and storyboarded by myself, and I mean, they're talks, every doctor has like this canned set of 20 talks that you always tell. We tried to make it much more engaging. But initially I worked with freelance animators. And then I actually now have a pretty exciting collaboration with WildBrain Studios, which is a local animation studio that has worked with people like the Ricky Gervais Show and done a lot of the more famous insurance commercials. So I'm really excited to kind of explore that creative relationship together.
All right, there was one more.
I guess I just want to see a timeline and how long it took for you to realize, hey, I need to change my approach.
7 months.
Anybody else? If not, woo, I don't know what that is. All right, oh, one more over here. Sorry.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Great speech, by the way.
Thank you.
Love the story. So how do you scale this? Are you going to drive for additional funding? It's going to clearly be about how you get these programs and these, little stories, if you will, into the offices of each individual, practitioner out there. So how do you do it?
So that's a great question. What we're currently moving ahead with now is that we actually are about to do an alpha test, I'm hoping, if everything goes through, at a local Bay Area healthcare organization that will hopefully be one of our first strategic partners. And because I realized, I can't really go to places like Sutter or Kaiser and expect them to pay me money now, it's really turned into a bit of a B2C venture for the near play, which is by using the credibility of an established clinic, we're beginning to form our brand to parents by saying, you wonder about WebMD, right? You wonder about mommy blogs. This is something you first saw in the clinic. It's going to be free to you when you want to access it again. And for physicians and clinics, they, I think, see the potential enough that they're willing to help serve as a distribution system. In terms of scaling, I actually think this can be pretty broadly applied to any medical specialty, to adult healthcare in particular. And my hope is that once we figure out a platform or a model where we find a way to collaborate with doctors' offices and hospitals, probably one or two key accountable care organizations, then actually bringing on a bigger editorial team, making content, and trying to make it as quickly as possible, since that is the name of the game in content production.
Cool, I think there's one more. Actually, we'll take two more, and then.
How'd you make the decision to go after businesses instead of customers?
Oh, well, so that I think was, you mean in terms of going to hospitals and ACOs as opposed to being B2C in the beginning? I mean, in all honesty, it's because it's very easy to think that it's already being served, right? There's no lack of medical information on the internet. So that was the initial reason why I didn't want to go to B2C, is because everyone would talk about, well, I mean, there is WebMD, there's Baby Center. And with the changes of the Affordable Care Act, it seemed like an emerging opportunity that I should try and take advantage of before reality and practicality started to set in.
All right, one more over here.
I'm wondering if you've thought about this application, or the application of this internationally, and especially in the developing world where people might have longer wait times and less access to the internet.
So that is a great question, and this kind of leads into why I picked animation. I did my residency at UCSF, and one of the hospitals that we have is San Francisco General Hospital, and anyone who has been there will tell you it's like practicing in a third world country, right? It's primarily a Latino population, primarily monolingual Spanish, and it's a situation where because they don't speak English as a native language, they're often short. They're basically given the shaft in terms of like patient education, right? So that's actually one of the big goals that I do have is animation has an easier production cycle to where I can actually create culturally sensitive materials in a primary language and actually go to other markets, like, and not necessarily just around wait times, but more just about overall health education, because very basic public education messages are lost because we don't have people trying to create content for them because you don't make money that way.
That's great. All right. Really cool stuff. All right, so next up, speaker 2 of 4, we have Laura Jarrell, who's been an entrepreneur from the beginning of her career. She's worked in a mix of tech and consumer retail and has been involved as a founder or CEO of business ranging from retail mountaineering, news and e-commerce, sports business, and nationwide salon brand, and others. Laura has also consulted with early startups, invested in some early stage opportunities, and currently works in personal finance for Morgan Stanley, where she helps individuals as well as small businesses with 401k plans, cash management, and of course, going public. Without further ado, here is Laura.
That's a hard act to follow. So I was just going to go straight to my mistake. I just didn't know which mistake I was going to go to. Could give my love life mistake, my parenting mistakes, or my business mistakes. We'll go with business. So like he said, I've actually been involved in a variety of businesses over the years, and I think that, you know, I have a laundry list of mistakes, but one of the ones that I think that I find myself looking back on and thinking about the most is an experience where I had to acquire another business. And at the time, I had one location for this company, and I had an opportunity to acquire a second location. And I reached out to some advisors. One of them was just sort of a general business advisor, and then one was a friend of mine who's a lawyer, to sort of look at the documents and sort of advise me on it. And they slowed the process down. And they slowed the process down so much that the deal fell through. And I think that the mistake I made was forgetting that I was the entrepreneur. I understood the business intimately. I'd already run one of the businesses. I knew I wanted this other business, and I wanted the deal to get done. And I let people that didn't really sort of appreciate the risks that I was willing to take give me advice. And because they were sort of experts in legal or experts in this, I listened to them. And I should have driven that ship better. I should have said, look, this is my goal. I want the deal done. This is the timeline. Your job is to make it happen as the legal team. And so that was probably, you know, as I look back on it, I think that that's the biggest mistake I made, or that was a big mistake I made, because I really would have liked to have owned that business. I could have closed that deal faster, and it would have happened. But I let, you know, outside advisors who didn't really understand it, who didn't understand me, who didn't understand the risks I was comfortable taking, and legal team get in the way of that experience. So that is the big mistake that I'm willing to share with you.
All right. Anybody have any questions for Laura? Oh, all the way over there. All right. Bear with me. Is there anybody closer to me at the moment who has a question? All right. Let's see. It was over. Here we go.
So basically the question I have is, did you feel that the process that you went through for acquiring that other business, were you kind of feeling that you were left out of it? Did you feel that it wasn't transparent enough for you? Why did you feel that it?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it probably was transparent enough for me. It was just more that, you know, from a lawyer perspective, you know, this was not a lawyer that had a lot of startup experience and a lot of entrepreneur experience. And so he was quick to go to, I mean, his job is to protect liability protection, basically. And so he was quick to go to, well, this is a risk, this is a risk, this is a risk. Well, this has to be taken care of, this has to be taken care of. And I was like, yeah, we really have to take care of that. But I didn't basically stop him. I didn't say, you know what, I don't care about those risks, I'm not doing them, because he was sort of so insistent and so like, duh. And I was sort of like, no, not duh. So, but I clearly wasn't good enough at that. So I think that I didn't hold the reins as tight as I should have. But it was transparent, but I just, I sort of followed the lead of, what I thought was a good legal advice.
So initially, eventually you think you chose the wrong lawyer?
Well, that's an excellent question. Yes. Obviously. So and actually what I'll tell you is that I used a lawyer that was because this was a small deal, it wasn't even a big deal. And this was a friend of mine who was happy to sort of jump in and help. And so I didn't pick him because I knew he was a great startup lawyer. It was more sort of, I had a person that was willing to help me. And so great, thanks a lot for looking at the documents. And so yes, that's actually probably the follow-up. If I were to give advice besides tell you about my mistake, my advice would be very careful when you select your advisors and your support team. Make sure that you are working with somebody that is paralleling you in terms of an understanding you, and that they recognize that they work for you, and that if you're trying to get a job done, that they're helping you get that job done while educating you and helping you understand the risks. But that if you're like, hey, you know what, getting the job done is goal one, I will take on those risks, then yes, I think that I picked the wrong lawyer because, and again, I don't think I was clear enough about that, and so I take all the ownership for the mistake. But yes, the first mistake was picking the wrong damn lawyer.
So I'm a lawyer.
But I have some good ones now.
So my question is, lawyers often get accused of being the business prevention department.
Yeah, I'm with you. Oh, sorry.
And so my question to you is, what have you changed in terms of your selection of legal counsel on a going forward basis?
I try to avoid counsel now. I think that, I actually have found a guy, actually, he's been part of startup before, that I would be more than happy to recommend to people, or I'm sure you're probably of that caliber also. I just think that, you have to ask the right questions, and you have to see what their experience is, and you have to just get them, it's like a personality match, frankly. You have to understand whether they are completely risk averse, and their job is just to try to, make sure nothing blows up, or whether they can appreciate the experience of being an entrepreneur and they are right along with you on that. So that would be what I've probably done differently now, is that I ask better questions and I look for the answers that I'm looking for.
Anybody else with a question? All right.
There was another lawyer in the room, I thought.
There's one more. Oh, there we go. I get one last one.
I didn't want to be the second guy to say I'm a lawyer, but
go ahead.
But I was on a panel at Start Out maybe a year ago, and a similar question came up, and I think it was asked by someone in the front row there, actually. And the question was, how do you know when to second guess your lawyer?
Yeah.
And you've sort of answered the question of like, when do you have the wrong lawyer? But how would you answer the question? You get some advice from a lawyer. You don't know the law. They don't know your business as well as they should. And they've given you advice, and you're thinking, I don't want to take it, but I'm not really sure. Yeah. What do you do? And what do you do then? What's your advice?
I was kind of hoping you could tell us.
I actually have a suggestion. I think you get a second opinion, just like you go to a doctor and they say you should be, we need to operate on you. I think if you have a question, if you have a sense that it's not the right advice, I would check with somebody else.
And I think that your point is exactly what happens, is that you think, well, this person knows, I'm hiring them or paying them to ask for their advice, and so it would be, silly of me to ask for your advice and then completely disregard it. But I do think that there's that give and take, and you're right, they don't really know and appreciate your business in the way you know it intimately. So at the end of the day, I think you have to, as an entrepreneur, remember that. You know your business better than anybody else. You know what you want to achieve. And if you're not getting the answer you want, go get a second opinion.
I was just going to add a note that if Are
you a lawyer too?
What's that? No, not at all. although I have read my share of legal docs, unfortunately. But one other thing besides an attorney, giving advice and maybe being slow or too cautious for what you want, they could also be, depending on the personality, very big negotiators. So if you're not really keeping on top of things, I've seen attorneys negotiate really great side deals inside my contract that I had no idea. It was really great, but it easily could have killed the deal because that wasn't what I was asking for. So it's not just the time and worry, but it's also the deal points themselves.
All right. Thank you, Laura. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who's it going to be?
Double mics. All right, next up, speaker 3 of 4, we have Alex G. McIntosh, who is the founding partner of EcoMuni Ventures, an impact fund focused on improving natural ecosystems and human health via investments in personal care and water. Through EcoMuni, Alex created and launched Thrive Natural Care, an innovative social enterprise with operations in Costa Rica and the USA. He's also the board director for Clearwater Systems, an innovative chemical-free water treatment company with installations around the world. Without further ado, here's Alex.
Thanks, Mark. So one of the things that I love, and I think it actually speaks a lot to where we've come as a society, is I get to be the minority gender candidate on tonight's panel, which is really cool. And I think that actually says a lot. Very cool. So I've been really lucky for the last little over 20 years. I've been able to work on some really, really beautiful new initiatives and companies in both the nonprofit and the for-profit sector. And about a year and a half ago, I was very, very fortunate to start this new company called Thrive. It's the most innovative business model that I've been part of, and the outputs of it are things for people to shave with and to take care of their skin with. But for me, it's been a really rewarding journey that's brought some of the most amazing people that I've met and some of the most interesting and tough to bring to life ideas that I've ever been part of. We were lucky our launch got a lot bigger than we were anticipating, and we got off to a really fast start, and there's some good people that are helping make it happen. But probably like most of you, whether you're a lawyer working for a large company or you're an entrepreneur, which most of the folks here are, you generate a shitload of mistakes when you start something new. And the great thing is there's almost no place to hide, either from yourself, from your team, from your spouse. And so the trick when Krys and Brian, is Brian Baca still here, the one that dragged me in here tonight? I'm going to have to get him because he's the one that actually got me here. The trick is, which one do you talk about? And the one that I think I wanted to focus in on is something that maybe resonates with all of us, but particularly entrepreneurs. And the mistake is letting your batteries run a little too low, right? And by that I mean, for the entrepreneur, your batteries, your energy, is sort of like what the back is to the body. Like everything is connected to it, right? Like all of the fundraising you do, all of the product development, all of the team building, and that's just work. That's not even including the stuff that you're doing at home, like with your spouse or your kids. Or just with your friends. And I think one of the big challenges for entrepreneurs, and it happens both when things are going really, really well and you're just killing it, right? And you're on like adrenaline and you almost can't go fast enough, as well as when it's really, really bad and you just don't think you're gonna make it, you're not sure how you're gonna meet payroll, you're not sure how you're gonna keep everything going together. And in both of those times, you can really run down your batteries very far. And I think all of us know what that feels like. You kind of show up to thing after thing, not really as your best self, right? You're not really making great decisions. You're usually looking at things more as like irritations and interruptions rather than opportunities, which when you're starting out and it's the PowerPoint, like everything's the opportunity, right? So I think the mistake that I wanted to put in perspective for all of us is that one of letting your batteries run too low. And you know when it happens. And There's the old truism that we can all think of, you hear again and again that whether it's your business or your life, that you should look at it as a marathon and not as a sprint. And that works, but the reality is we all do need to run sprints a lot. Like, that's how life is, especially when you're starting a company. But you gotta keep your finger on the pulse, and when your batteries run a little too low, you don't show up making great decisions and you're not being your best self. And that's when you've got to do some adjustment. So what I learned from that, and I'm really lucky, Mark mentioned that half of my team is in Costa Rica. And for me, one of the great sources of recharge when I really run my batteries down is working with another culture. And I don't know, have any of you spent time in or worked much with Latin American cultures here? Okay, so a few of you have. And what's really cool is, they're not any less hardworking than we are, but they definitely have a really interesting emphasis on relationships and family. And I'm kind of stunned in my mode of, deadlines and getting stuff done and executing when one of my team members comes to me and with a really just genuine and beautiful interaction that's about us as people beyond the business. And so for me, one of the great lessons has been sort of tapping into that and having that cultural part. And the other thing that I would share, just an example that I had last weekend of a way to sort of get out of that bind, is there's a really interesting guy that I met on a panel that I was speaking at down in Santa Barbara last week. And we were talking about adventure and the spirit of adventurousness for entrepreneurs. And I was sitting there, and I'm a pretty active guy, and these guys were they were literally climbing Mount Everest. They were doing just incredible stuff in addition to running businesses. And I felt a little lame sort of sitting there on the panel. But one of the entrepreneurs shared something with me that I'll share with you, and you may have heard it. His name is Joel. And what Joel said is he tries to live even his busiest times in his life to the 70-20-10 rule. And the 70 is the stuff that you really have to do to kind of keep the lights on, keep the family going. It's the day-to-day stuff that keeps things moving forward. And then the 20% is where he's really networking and interacting and engaging with people that kind of expand the horizons, both of his business and his personal life. And then the remaining 10%, and he doesn't do this every day, but I thought it was kind of a cool idea, is where he's really going outside of his comfort zone, and he's doing things or he's with people that are looking at things in a very different way. And for me, what I've found over the last year as I've been bringing Thrive to life, both in the good times and the bad, that 10% doesn't always have a payback and ROI right in the moment. But when you're with people or you're in instances that are really outside of your normal experience, that's when you're reminded of how it all fits together and usually why you're doing the shit that you're doing, right? And it's really important to build those 70, 10, and 20 things in. So in a long-winded way, the mistake is running your batteries down. And the way to get out of that is to remember to connect really well with people around you, particularly ones from other cultures, and then try to add a little bit of structure to your life so you're not just in your zone, cranking out and executing all the time. I'd stop with that.
All right, any questions from the audience for Alex? Anybody? Oh, all the way in the front. I feel like people are conspiring to make me get exercise right now or something.
I am. So I'm curious to know, how do you find that structure? If you're someone who's used to cranking all the time, where do you look for resources to sort of shift the structure? Because it's easy to say find one, but there are a variety of those out there, and they're also they don't always fit you. What did you do to sort of find a structure that worked for you?
Yeah, it's a process that's ongoing, but I'll tell you what I did, and I don't know if this applies to everyone. So I like reading a lot. Sometimes you can read stuff about this, and you kind of write it down, and it goes in your to-do list. And some entrepreneurs are super organized and very programmatic in the way they do things, right? So you can kind of build that in, and you can kind of track it. But what I would suggest, because when you're an entrepreneur, particularly when you're in the building phase, the early days, you get really lost in what you're doing, and the whole notion of time kind of changes, right? So what I've found to be really helpful is both mentors and friends and my spouse, my husband that I've been with for 10 years, is you tell them what you're trying to aim for, right? And then you ask them in their own way to kind of hold you to it. And I gotta say, especially on the days where I'm a little cranky, I don't wanna hear that I'm not hitting that 20 and 10. I get a little annoyed with that, but that's usually the great reminder that you're kind of outside of that anyway. But it's almost like creating, and some people call it their personal board of advisors. I'm a little bit less formal that way, but I think if you let people that want you to win know what you're trying to do, they will help you get there.
Any other questions? Anybody? Oh, there you go.
So for me personally, the one thing that like gets my batteries down low is when I have to multitask a lot of the time for an extended period of time. That's not something that's cultural, it's just me. How do you usually, does that happen to you, and how do you prevent that from happening?
Yeah, yes. I don't prevent it from happening. I think it's, I don't know what your company is or what you're running right now, but I think every entrepreneur in here, that's kind of what you have to do, especially in the early days, before you have a lot of team and you're starting to become more like compartmentalized or departmentalized in your company. So it's just something that you have to do, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Most entrepreneurs actually like that type of work as opposed to sitting down and doing like Excel spreadsheets all day. So what I would say is if the batteries are running down because you're doing too much of that, then my suggestion is, after what I've sort of put together for this story here tonight and my experience with this panel that I was kind of referencing, is if your batteries are running down from too much multitasking, then what you've got to do is you've got to really look at how you're spending your time. So that 70% of building the company that you're doing, the day-to-day stuff, are you out networking? Are you with people that are kind of taking you slightly outside of your headspace, whether they're funders or partners or whatever they are? And then that 10%, that really inspiring 10% that's way outside of your normal experience. And my guess is if you're multitasking, doing a lot of stuff, you're executing. And executing you have to do, but don't forget that that's not enough. Because if your batteries run down and it's your company that you've started, like who's going to attract the funders? Who's going to attract the new talent? You only can do that when you're at least like close to your peak, right? So multitasking isn't bad. It's what you got to do. But if it's too much and you're not getting the 10%, you got to build it in.
There we go.
Anything
One
else?
more over here on the other side. Yeah.
No lawyer questions so far. This is good.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mike.
So about the 70-20-10, can you give us just a case study, like a story, like an extreme 10% to inspire us?
That's a great question. There have been a few. I would say I'm gonna use an example from work. If you'll bear with me, it's a short anecdote, but it's the first thing that I thought of, and it's a poignant one, so it means something to me. Okay, so I want everyone who's an entrepreneur to think back to the early days when they were getting their back of napkin or their PowerPoint into reality, right? That kind of beautiful but messy stage where everything that was possible and on pieces of paper is now hitting the real world. And for me, what that meant was this really interesting business model. It's a regenerative supply chain that we're using to grow all these really amazing plants and put into our products. We had to find farms down in Costa Rica that were kind of degraded, and where the set of characters that own the farms were the right ones, where we could work with them to kind of regenerate and restore their farms. And so my team, knowing that it's a long journey for me to come down there and I had a lot of other stuff going on, was supposed to have set up a number of farms for us to visit. And has anyone been to Costa Rica here? Okay. Oh, actually, a lot of people have. Cool. Okay. So where we were was on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. It was very humid. It was rainy. It was buggy. And the farms they chose were shitty. They were not the right fit. It was like if this was the Goldilocks thing, like everything was like too big or too far or not the right thing. And we went from place to place. And the penultimate moment is I had done an overnight flight going down there because I've been really busy. So I'm exhausted. It's hot. It's muggy. The farms we're seeing are really crappy. And I'm really disappointed in my team. And the second to last farm we were going to, there was a pack of wild dogs that chased us. And it's funny now, but at the time it was so demoralizing. I mean, I almost wanted them to catch us because I was so frustrated how the day was unfolding. And it was a really like big, bad pack of dogs. And they chased us and we got some sticks and we finally like got away from them. And it was like humiliating and bad. And so at this point, I was ready to just say, like, screw this. I'm going to find the worst possible corporate job I can and go back to. This is the worst decision I've ever made. We've all been there, right? We've done this thing. And the last farm we went to wasn't a perfect farm, but one of my team members, who's a technical expert, and he's probably one of the most famous ethnobotanists in the world, he only speaks Spanish. And he took the farmer aside, who was very skeptical about what we were trying to do. And he started explaining to the farmer what we were trying to do. And this man, Raphael, he used his own words to describe what this project was doing, and it came from him. And it was the moment that every entrepreneur knows where your idea has moved from you to a group of people, and it's then their idea. And that is one of the most beautiful moments. And so what the farmer did then after that, I found really inspiring. So this is total happenstance. I mean, I didn't seek this guy out after the pack of wild dogs to make him my 10% inspiration, right? But it just happened. And when I left that, I was so moved, and it was such a meaningful thing for me. It was that small, poignant moment. And it was so outside of anything I'd ever done. So it wasn't something that I manufactured. And I guess my lesson that I'm listening to myself say is that it's often not something that we plan, but especially when we're outside, so far outside of our experience zone, that's when we really learn good things. And that, the batteries just went like zoom on that one. So I guess that's how I'd end it, okay? So I think we should probably wrap it up there. I will say I have for, I think I brought it, I have for probably like 15 people, I brought some samples of these great products from Costa Rica. There's some samples in here. So if you come see me afterwards, I got about 15 and I can give them out to folks, okay?
Yeah, awesome. All right, 2 minutes. All right, so last up, save the best for last. We have Krys Freeman, who's one of today's rising entrepreneurs, technologists, and visionaries, a firm believer in technology as a vehicle for radical change. Krys seeks out projects that stretch our imagination in order to tackle complex enterprise and civic challenges. She also has a mobile app in development called Hella Rides, which is exciting. So without further ado, here is Krys.
Hello. Okay, so it's a lot of acts to follow, but I will do my best to present in a great way. So my name is Krys, as you heard, and I am going to talk to you a little bit about Hella Rides, and then I'll get into my biggest mistake, which I think is a little bit interesting in the context of some of the things that folks have already said. Hella Rides is a project that I started officially probably last year, but I've been working on for the last 3 years, on and off in different iterations. And as you know, as startup entrepreneurs, it takes many iterations to get to the finish line. It started because I moved here from SoCal and lived in very deep east of Oakland and was traveling to Burlingame for my first job that I got here by public transit. It took me 2.5 hours each way. It was painful. And one of the things that I kept seeing when I was standing at the bus stop and the bus driver was driving past me and not stopping was also that I was seeing cars with one person in it. And I figured they probably were going the same way as me, maybe at least going some of the way. And I was like, dang, it would be awesome if I could just get in the car with them, and just go, because I was just going downtown Oakland to catch the BART. You know, I could go to the Coliseum, but it was a little bit out of the way. And I was just like, I wish I could do that. I wish we could do this on our phones. I could just be like, boop, boop, hey, I want to go downtown. You're going downtown. Let's go together. And, I let that sort of marinate for a while. And then at some point, I went to a hackathon and actually tried to make something like this come to life. So I worked with a team there, and we created an app called Beta Stout, which is less of connecting people to share rides and more of letting people give feedback on the bus rides. Because my experience was, one, buses sometimes wouldn't stop. Other times they wouldn't show up. Other times the bus driver was, cantankerous. Just a variety of experiences that were just not fun. And so I just wanted to give people a voice to be able to explain what's happening. Because while AC Transit has a survey, it's not user-friendly, it's not mobile responsive, although they just made a mobile version. But it just wasn't accessible to the folks that I saw on the bus every day. Folks are not sitting here trying to iPhone their way through this bus driver was mean to me. So we created an app where you could send SMS messages basically to the app and say, hey, this is the bus ID, this is what happened to me, whether it was good or bad. And I didn't want to make it just like a crank monster situation. I wanted to give people an opportunity to commend people who did well. But just using SMS, because I felt like that was, one, ubiquitous. Whether you have a smartphone or not, you can send a text message. But also, as part of the hackathon I was participating in, that was one of the goals, is to make it accessible to audiences that don't have access to broadband regularly. And so that's a long little background to sort of talk about the context I'm coming from with Hella Rides, is that I'm looking at populations that typically don't get the sort of attention that we see with other apps, like communities that are low income, communities that are working class, communities of color, et cetera. Like folks that, aren't the typical market for apps. And so Hella Rides came full circle in that I wanted to actually pursue the opportunity to say, hey, if you're in some area, I'm your neighbor, I'm going to work in the morning. If I'm going to work in the morning and I want to use the carpool lane, 2 of y'all can come in with me and we'll go over and we'll make our way through, chipping on some of the toll, and let's just have a better experience, get there faster, reduce the number of people idling at the Bay Bridge. Things like that, not crazy, but not easy per se. Often I get the question, isn't Lyft or Uber already doing that? No, they're not, because it's $45 to go over the bridge in Uber. I know from experience. I'm not gonna tell that story because that was a mistake as well. So, I've talked to people about this idea over the years, and, always the skeptics, questions about Uber, questions about Lyft, how can you do that? Or, why are you doing that if these things already exist? And what I came to at some point is like, well, it's similar, but it's not. It's very much a different sort of avenue through which to solve a problem, which is getting people off the road, out of their cars, but also not jumping the gun and saying, oh, we're just gonna all just get out of our cars now, because I don't think that's realistic. We wanna get people to use their automobiles more efficiently, but you have to, crawl before we walk. My feeling about what my biggest mistake was is thinking that my entrepreneur story had to sound like someone else's. I see that happening in terms of the sorts of people that I'm trying to attract and people that I want to use the app. People are like, well, are they gonna pay for that? Do you have income for that? Because the thing is, you wanna find people that can pay for the product that you have. But if people are paying for BART and paying for their car and paying for gas, they can probably chip in $1 or $2 for a trip across the bridge. Also just thinking about the fact that in the space, I am a little bit of an anomaly. And that's like the elephant in the room, but I didn't expect to be in this room when I started thinking about this process. And I don't often see people who look like me in rooms that I'm in talking about my apps. And for a while, I spent a lot of time trying to fly under the radar. I'd go to events and my hair wouldn't be quite as big. And I wouldn't be as comfortable being me in those spaces because I was trying to fit a mold or feel, more accessible to the people around me and trying to, just make everybody else feel more comfortable rather than sort of just being who I am. Because typically when I've shown up now as Krys Freeman, people are like, oh, you're nice, I like you, you've got good energy. And that sort of thing came full circle because people remember me, mostly because of the hair, but also because of the idea, I think. And I think that sort of thing, I don't know when it changed, but I know that when it did change, it changed my perspective on how I approached the app. I'm still a little bit gun shy about talking about it to people, but I'm a little bit less so than I was before because every time I do tell someone about it, they're like, wow, that seems like a really logical, cool idea. What are some of the pitfalls you have? And actually want to engage me in conversation about it. Whereas before, if I was being the person that I used to be, I wouldn't have been able to even have those conversations, which is going back to your points earlier. So, I guess all that to say is I think as a mistake, the learning lesson I've gotten from that is that you should really take hold of what your specific, what makes you you and what makes your idea resonate with the people you're trying to serve. I have this thought about product market fit that always comes up in my head. I'm like, when you talk about it in terms of who you're serving, people resonate more with it because they're like, oh, this idea is great, but who is the person that's gonna receive it? And that's constantly where I'm thinking about how to leverage this idea that I've had into something that can be real in the world. So that's my story. And I welcome any questions you have.
All right. Who has some questions for Krys? Anybody?
No pressure.
Come on. We need to end with some tough questions. Nobody has one?
Don't do that to me.
No? Oh, there you go. Whoa. Questions from the other panelists. Serious.
So first of all, I really enjoyed your talk, and I love how you were talking about targeting markets that aren't typically considered as sexy markets to target. So my question for you is, have you thought about how you could introduce this in like low-income, underserved populations? And how will you navigate? I don't know if I necessarily see it as a technology barrier, because a lot of my underserved patients all had iPhones, inevitably.
So I typically am talking to people about it, whether I'm at a bus stop, which is not as often lately because I just avoid the bus altogether. I'm like, I have a bike, I'm gonna get some cardio in, yay. A lot of the ways that I've sought out potential like clients are on the internet. So I'm looking at people who are doing this already or trying to do it already. So I have a couple of different ways that I'm sort of sourcing information. So I have an automation setup where I'm pulling tweets from Twitter that are saying AC Transit in it, saying AC Transit in late, saying BART in late, just looking at the common complaints that come up. And I have like thousands of tweets. It's kind of hilarious and also really sad because, you know, AC Transit's like, oh, fill out our form. And I'm like, that form though, nobody wants to fill out that form. On top of the fact that I filled out the form when I first got here because they had just started their pilot of the GPS program where they were showing when the bus would come and like the time, the ETA. And the bus that I was actually using went to the Coliseum BART, didn't have GPS on it. So I had no idea when it was coming. The schedule was always wrong. And I'm like, but this goes to a BART. So it's kind of imperative that we should have this. So I filled it out. It took them 2 months to call me back. They have a little checkbox. Do you want someone to call you back about this? And I was like, yeah. And then 2 months later, I'm like, wait, what? What are you calling me about? Oh, didn't even remember that I had sent it. So that's one of the ways that I go about it. I also kind of creep Craigslist a little bit. So I pull all of not all of them, but specifically the rideshare posts that come up. And I have like a spreadsheet, so I've been manually trying to like match people. And I haven't actually reached out to them because I'm trying to find a tactful way to like say, hey, I saw your Craigslist post. Here's somebody else that's got a Craigslist post. They're going your same way. You want to ride with them? You should email them here. And I know it sounds a little sketchy. But at the same time, like they're already posting it to the public. They're putting it out there. If I send a like email that says, hey, these 2 things came up, go check out the Craigslist post. It's not as creepy as being like, hey, my name's Krys. You should ride with such and such. So I'm trying to find ways to sort of bridge the gap between, you know, people who are sort of engaged in the process already, but also sort of, they're the target market. They're just not like everyone quite yet. Because I want to focus on particularly people coming from the East Bay going to San Francisco and then going back home. And I've gotten a lot of interest from folks like up in Richmond, even in San Francisco, in the Valley. When I pitched it at Lesbians Who Tech, people were like, bring it to Austin, bring it to Portland, bring it to Boston. You know, so I know that there's an interest in it, but I'm trying to be a little bit measured about sort of approaching it like with a target market that seems sizable enough, but also manageable for just me and like the people that say they're interested in helping out with it. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. 2 more over here.
Okay, so I know you mentioned that a lot of the feedback you get a lot of the time is, you know, like you said, Lyft, Uber, you know, it's going to happen. So what would you say is the best advice you could provide somebody who necessarily is thinking of something that's in a similar market, in a similar target market, but not necessarily the exact same product? Because I know a lot of times that can be a lot of our downfalls is that, you know, you have this great idea and you think of, there's this other alternative that's not necessarily the same thing, but it's similar. So what advice would you offer somebody, you know, who would kind of feel like that some of the time?
Are you saying like someone that has a product that there's a
has
similar
a product
part?
idea in the sense that, you know, there is a similar product out there, but it is not the exact necessarily product that you are providing?
It's one of the questions that I've had to ask myself a lot and really just dig in. How similar is it? And how is the target market I'm looking at being addressed? Are they addressing my target market, and should I just sort of throw my hands up with it? I feel like it's just really about digging into what your goal is really and looking at this other product. Like, for instance, I don't know how many of you follow the ride-sharing network, but there are so many out there. I have like all the apps on my phone. Hitch is one of the apps that's similar to Hella Rides. It only operates in San Francisco. And it reiterates the need for something that crosses the barrier, because I think there's a lot of sort of bifurcation. Like people are over here and people are over there. Like I don't come to San Francisco very often, but at the same time, there are people that do this every day. So when I saw Hitch and people are always sending me things like, oh, Lyft Line and Uber Pool are here. How are you? Are you okay? Like checking on me, like, are you losing your mind? I'm like, oh, no, I mean, great. Somebody's trying to solve this problem. Other people are trying to solve this problem. I think it's important not to think about this in terms of scarcity. Like the more people that are solving this problem, the better for all of us it is, because there's more cars off the road. If I'm doing it in my little niche in Oakland, cool, because not a lot of startups are doing their thing in Oakland, and that I feel like gives me room to actually excel. But for me, like every time that happens, I literally just go look at what they're doing and sort of, oh, great. Like I give them, kudos. I'm like, I've tried to like track the guys down and be like, hey, because they used to be called Corral. So like I found out about them and I was like, oh, like I was really excited for them actually. Because I don't think it's a scarcity thing. If someone beats me to the punch, I have ideas for days. This is the one that I've been passionate about, and so I've stayed with it regardless because I feel like it's still not quite being addressed. Like there's still a little room that is still not filled.
All right, there's one more. Somebody else back here had a question, I thought? Oh.
You mentioned about the creep factor. How do you get over that? I mean, for something like Uber, obviously one can pretend that you're the driver and one can pretend that you're a passenger. But for something like Hello Rides, you're pretty much bringing somebody into your car and you're a private individual. You can't pretend that you're like a taxi driver. Or like it's some psychological sense, right? How do you do that?
Well, and that's part of the reason why the app sort of is intended to exist, because people already do this. They do it in casual carpool. And it's creepier because you have no idea who this person is. You don't know their name. You might not get their license plate when you get in the car. And you sit there in silence because that's part of the etiquette of casual carpool. You do not talk unless the driver talks to you. So, and when I tell people that, they're like, oh, well, I can't do that, but I'll do Hello Rides. Like, comparisons, like, oh, shades of gray. But part of the idea is the things about Hello Rides that are like Uber and Sidecar and Lyft and Hitch and et cetera is that we're trying to provide reduce the amount of anonymity that is there. So you're a private person, but you could have just went to casual carpool and picked me up just as much as you could have went to Hello Rides and said, hey, I want to ride with you, girl. So, Sorry. I'm a little punchy. It's late in the evening.
Okay. I think that is a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Krys. That was great. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for the speakers for being here. Those were super, super fun. I feel like I learned a lot. We're going to have sort of networking and drinks for another like 15, 20 minutes. So feel free to corner them and ask them all of your other questions that you didn't get to ask now. Big thank you again to Galvanize for giving us this awesome space. We're going to have video from the event later, and we'll upload that so you can share it with your friends who weren't here. And also thank you to Start Out and Lesbians Who Tech for helping us find such amazing speakers. And we should have another event within the next 2 to 3 months, so check your email. The next one should be fun. We're going to try to get hopefully Dave McClure to be here and some other people, so we'll see. So thank you for being here. We're going to have drinks, like I said, for 15, 20 minutes, so feel free to hang around. Thanks so much.